Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode, Kaz Windness joins us to discuss their children's book that includes multiple autistic characters. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Kaz, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to start out our conversation by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Well, I, like a lot of other people, only discovered my autism through the diagnosis of my child. My kiddo was identified very early in school, just having a lot of social issues, extremely smart, reading at age 3, like whole books to themselves. And so we couldn't hold them back, but when they were in class, very disruptive, correcting the teacher a lot was something I was called into the office quite a bit for. And in first grade, the teacher said, "I've seen this a million times. Your child is certainly on spectrum." But they recommended that I did not get them tested because they said in our particular school, they've seen how that held autistic kids back, that they would be excluded from regular classroom activities. They would be in a separate place. And because our kid is so smart, they didn't want that to happen. So we followed that advice. And as they progressed through elementary school and into middle school, they started to have a lot of problems with dysregulation and also depression. They started to no longer be excelling at their schoolwork, but falling behind. And into the early high school, were failing classes, very depressed. So we recognized that they need a 504. They needed some extra help. And in order to be able to get those, we needed to have an official diagnosis. And so as I went through the diagnosis process with my child, I very much recognized through that testing that this was me. And, in my family, it's funny because on my father's side, there's plenty of diagnosed autism, but it's usually with the male identifying people in my family. And it's funny, I've had these conversations with them saying, well, you wouldn't understand this. And they would describe something about autism. And I would be like, no, that's totally get that. Might look a little different. I'm very high masking. But so I went through the process of getting my own diagnosis and also recognizing that, well, just how much that's held me back. I was into my 40s when this happened, and how my life would have been different had I had an understanding that I wasn't just broken, that I was wired differently. And it took me about 2 years to really internalize and process my life in context of autism, and also, reformulating my life in ways that were more conducive to me being successful and being regulated. And that's when I started to have publishing success too, because I started to put some bumpers around what I could do and what I couldn't do. And, keeping myself out of burnout, which is something that has been a lifelong struggle for me. My kiddo and I have a lot of bonding over this, and a sense of humor with it and a real understanding. So I'm so glad that I understand that for myself now. And it's also unwrapped some understanding in my mom's side of the family too. For this, we definitely come by it on both sides. So that was kind of a long description of how I came to that understanding. But here we are.
Podcasts are meant for long descriptions, so
Okay,
so I appreciate that. Now, you're the author of the Bitsy Bat book series, in which each book explores a different aspect of autism. The second book of the series, Bitsy Bat Team Star, will be on sale February 4th. What would you like listeners to know about the book?
So in this book, Bitsy is excited. They're doing a critter crawl races, or it's kind of like a school Olympics, like your field day. And she's the only flyer in school. And we discover in the first book that it's just part of her special interest is that she's a flyer and she loves flying. And she also, in the first book discovers that it's okay to be special. It's okay to be different. She's the only upside down a student at Critical Elementary. The rest of the students are nocturnal animals. And so in the second book, when a new student comes to class, Enzo Owl, she feels her relationships are sort of being upended by the new student who is popular and is also a flyer. So it challenges her relationships, how she can maintain those, and also her understanding of what makes her special. So in the second book, we're also introducing a character who's non-speaking, which I'm really excited about. He uses an AAC device. He uses symbols. He also uses some sign language to communicate. It's not fundamental to the storytelling at all, but I think it's just another, showing different aspects of our differences or inclusivity in a classroom. So I'm excited to have Enzo in the classroom, and he's never been competitive about it, but it's something that Bitsy takes on herself and, struggles to overcome, knowing that it's not how she performs, it's not what she does, but it's who she is that makes her lovable and special and included. And that's what I want to carry through all of these books is that, I think a lot of us that are on the, we have these special abilities or whatever, that those are the kind of things that people latch onto and sort of use us for. And we start to identify ourselves as valuable because of what we can perform. And I don't want it to be about that. I want everyone to know that you are lovable just as you are. You don't need to perform something to be included.
Now, I don't want to shortchange you. You are more than just the author of this book. You're also the illustrator. And the illustration in the book really is beautiful. And
Thank you.
And as someone that loves the process of creation, I was wondering what is your process in illustrating your books? Because you illustrate more than just this book.
Yes, I'm actually an illustrator first. You hear about like the kids that are really interested in horses or dinosaurs. I was the drawing kid. I was the art kid. Always, and it was part of my regulation is just to draw, and I would get in trouble all the time in school for drawing. When actually I could think and hear and understand and learn better if I was actually drawing. So, and I also struggled more with communication. So for me to be able to tell my stories, I found that using those visual symbols made it easier for me to explain what was going on in my thought or the stories I wanted to tell, and the words came later. So usually it is pictures that come to me first, and it's usually a character too that presents themselves. And then I, if I'm really engaged with whatever that character is that usually appears in my sketchbook as a doodle, I start to ask them questions about what their story is, and that's how I start to lean into the storytelling. But in terms of process, it's usually a pencil drawing, and then I take it into digital drawing, Photoshop usually, to do the painting part of that. But it goes through a lot of different sketches and revisions and working with a publisher and an art director on that. But always it starts with character for me. I want to get to know that character. I also have a special interest in people and personality types and why people work the way they do. So that's part of how I understand the world and myself, by exploring these characters and getting to know these characters.
There are very few characters that I find in any type of story that use AAC to communicate. I was really thrilled to see one of these characters in your book. The character Enzo the Owl uses AAC. And I was wondering, you might have learned about AAC users in the development of this character.
So one of the awesome things about having a book out, Bitsy Bat School Star was the first book. I've had the opportunity to go into a lot of different classrooms and work with a lot of different kids, including ones that have communication differences or use those accessibility devices like AAC. So I became very interested in non-speakers and how they communicate, and learning a lot about, like spelling boards and, just the physical board where you'll just touch or tap to a symbol to communicate. I really wanted to show that in this book, and also through that process, learning to use an AAC device and learning to use those symbols. And that was one of the biggest challenges, and also a piece of empathy that I grew understanding how difficult that can be to communicate yourself through the limitations of that technology. And also when your body isn't cooperating in the way that, a lot of us enjoy, how difficult that is to, just get the finger to touch a symbol or to find the right symbol, and how much learning that takes in order to be able to accomplish that. But I really wanted to show that and normalize that. Even something like headphones in the classroom. I've had so many teachers and so many parents come up to me and say, this is the first time I've ever seen a child using noise canceling headphones in the classroom, shown, depicted in art. And when young kids see that, it normalizes it. It doesn't make that kid an exception. This is something that happens in classrooms, and it makes it easier, I think, even for me as an adult, wearing headphones in public or using some other things to help regulate myself. The more we show it, the more it normalizes it and makes it more accessible for more people. So certainly using an AAC device was one thing that I wanted to include in there. And also, it adds another layer of literacy. So as you're reading through the text, you will see that I've shown in speech bubbles coming off the AAC device how Enzo is communicating. So you can also read those symbols. So even if you don't, have that full vocabulary to read the whole story to yourself, you can read those symbols and, follow the narrative through those AAC symbols.
I love Bitsy Bat from beginning to end. And I say the end because at the end of the book, you have a glossary of terms about autism. I thought it was really cool to not just see all these terms in the book, but you took it a step further and applied how each of these terms specifically impacts the characters in the book. Can you talk about the evolution of this educational aspect of the book?
Well, it always starts with learning by yourself, right?
Yeah.
So not just learning how autism impacts the way I see or feel the world. And of course, each of these books is told from an autistic perspective. And I just want to be clear that it's my perspective, and I am certainly not the be-all, end-all perspective, which is why I appreciate shows like this, that you have a lot of different people with a lot of different experiences on it. But it's also just doing a lot of research and talking a lot to experts in the autism community, especially people that are autistic themselves, because I think those are the best sources to get the real picture of what it's about, rather than having an outside expert tell us what autism is. So it's a lot of research. It's a lot of working with my editor and the experts at Simon & Schuster as well, because we really want to get this right. And I spend a lot more time on that back matter than I do with anything else. It's probably the most challenging part of it because it is nonfiction, right? And also just getting the terminology right. So for me, I do identify as autistic rather than someone with autism. And, and I never want to tell anyone else how they should identify, but having that truth of how I identify is present in that. And we do talk about just the nuances of how we say a sentence, or, is this othering? How can we be more inclusive, or how can we make it make more sense, like make it more grounded? And also in the more about autism, we also want to make it accessible to those younger readers. So the vocabulary is not very sciencey or very erudite. Is that a word? It's accessible to those younger kids too. So you could actually read this with a younger kid and they would be able to digest and metabolize what those definitions are. But I'm so glad that you noticed that. It's something we have in both books, and we definitely make extra room to have that in the back of the book.
Oftentimes we'll talk about communication for us as autistic people. And one of the things that we'll often say is, being direct and clear and specific with communication. But a part of being direct, specific, and clear is context. And I think having that context in the book was really, really powerful.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. We talked a lot about that when we were going through the definitions to make sure it was specific to what had happened in the book. There is some of that in the first book too. So we wanted to make sure in the second book that we covered the important points that you got from the first book, but also pull some of those things out that weren't applicable to the second book and add new definitions and new knowledge to take on, just so you had a full picture of both of them. So I really appreciate that you noticed that.
Now, Bitsy Bat aligns with my favorite type of stories, which are neurodiversity affirming stories.
Yeah.
As children, we definitely didn't have many of these stories. So while there aren't enough now, it's great to see more and more of these stories like yours emerging. So beyond Bitsy Bat series, have there been other neurodiversity affirming stories or characters that have most resonated with you, Kaz?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of your favorite characters were autistic all along. I mean, the alarm stalking is not neurotypical, you know what I mean? So it's just like these coding, and I think for me, being a very bookish person, like finding myself in books, even if they didn't outright say that they were autistic or neurodivergent, has been really important. But I do appreciate that publishing and, readers and educators are understanding the need for these books, but also told from our perspective, because there have been plenty of autism books out there, but they're told from a parent or and you'll notice in those books too that it's not centering the autistic character, that it's about them. And the thing that bothers me the most and why I wanted to write Bitsy is because sometimes it's just like, well, look how good they are at math, and so they solved this big problem. Or they perform something that they are particularly good at, and then people realize that they're acceptable. And I did not want to I wanted to center a character. And the other thing is centering a female character, is because most of those books have a male-centric character. But I digress. A recent book out last year, Steve Asbell, Clap Your Hands, is such a good book. And it talks a lot about the sensory overwhelm, and also how using stimming and other means in order to self-regulate, and also the joy in stimming and how good it feels, and just the visuals in that. He's also an author, illustrator. I strongly recommend that one. But, and looking, we're all kind of publishing at the same time. So bringing each other up and lifting each other's voices. Tiffany Hammond, A Day with No Words, is another one. And I came into that book after I'd already started to use AAC device, visuals in my book. But if you like seeing books that have AAC devices and non-speaking characters, I highly recommend checking out A Day with No Words. But we've been here all along. The public might have called it something different, but autistic characters and autistic people have been here all along.
And lastly, Kaz, how can our listeners learn more about and purchase Bitsy Bat Team Star?
Probably the easiest way to learn more about it and get links. And also I have educator lesson plans, 3 really great lesson plans developed by a curriculum expert. You can just go to bitsybat.com. You'll get to all the information there. But all of my books are available really at any of your favorite bookstores. I always say try and support your indies. They need it. But bitsybat.com is a great place to go. And my publisher is Simon & Schuster.
Well, Kaz, it was wonderful to meet you and talk to you about your new book. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much to Kaz for the conversation. To learn more about Kaz and Bitsy Bat Team Star, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you, and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on what are some of your favorite stories and how do they speak to your experience. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through our customized life coaching and community groups. We also support parents and partners of autistic individuals by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.